What would you do if your own family tried to steal $1 million from you? Not strangers, not criminals, but the people who sat at your dinner table, the people who smiled at your mother's funeral. My name is Lucas and I'm 29 years old. 3 years ago, my mother passed away and left me everything. $1 million and a mansion that had been in our family for generations. But within weeks of her death, my stepsister forged documents, manipulated my grieving father, and nearly succeeded in taking everything my mother worked her entire life to give me. This is the story of how I lost everything, fought back in court, and sent my stepsister to prison. And now she's begging for forgiveness from behind bars while my stepmother faces the consequences of her actions. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, stick around. Because this story has more twists than a courtroom drama, and I promise you, the ending will shock you. Let me take you back to where it all began. My mother was an incredible woman. She wasn't born into wealth, far from it. She grew up in a small apartment with her single mother, wearing hand-me-down clothes and working part-time jobs from the age of 14. But she had something money can't buy: ambition and an unbreakable work ethic. By the time she was 30, she had built her own real estate company from the ground up. She started by flipping houses in neglected neighborhoods, seeing potential where others saw decay. She worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. She missed parties and vacations. She sacrificed everything for her dream. And it paid off. By her 50s, she owned 17 properties across the state and had built a mansion, our family home, with her own careful planning and oversight. Every room in that house had a story. Every corner held a memory of her success. I watched her build that empire while I was growing up. She taught me the value of hard work, integrity, and never giving up when things got tough. She was my hero, my role model, my everything. When I turned 18, she sat me down and told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Lucas, everything I've built, every brick in this house, every dollar in the bank, it's all for you. You're my legacy. Promise me you'll protect what I've built, no matter what happens." I promised her. I had no idea how important that promise would become. My parents divorced when I was 12. It wasn't messy or dramatic. They had simply grown apart. My father moved on pretty quickly, and when I was 16, he married Margaret. Margaret came with a daughter from her previous marriage, my stepsister Rebecca, who was 2 years younger than me. Now, I want to be clear about something. In the beginning, I actually liked Rebecca. She was funny, smart, and we got along well. We weren't super close, but there was no animosity. We were just two teenagers navigating a blended family situation. Margaret seemed nice enough too, though I always felt like she was a bit too interested in my mother's success. But my mother remained the center of my world. Even after the divorce, she was always there for me. Every school play, every birthday, every moment I needed her. She never remarried. She told me once that she had found her true love in building something meaningful, and that I was the greatest achievement of her life. 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in October, I got the call that changed everything. My mother had suffered a massive heart attack at her office. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. She was only 57 years old. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing in the rain, watching them lower her casket into the ground, feeling like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. My father stood beside me, awkward and distant. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I never actually saw tears. Rebecca stood behind them on her phone. That should have been my first warning sign. After the funeral, the lawyer read my mother's will. It was straightforward and clear. She left everything to me: the mansion, the real estate portfolio, and $1 million in liquid assets. There were small charitable donations to causes she cared about, but her primary estate went to her only child, me. My father wasn't surprised. He had been well compensated in their divorce settlement years earlier. He knew my mother wanted her life's work to stay with her bloodline. Margaret's face, however, went cold when she heard the reading. I saw her jaw clench. I saw Rebecca's eyes narrow. But at the time, I was too consumed by grief to process what those looks meant. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. Because, within 2 weeks, everything I inherited was under attack. The first sign of trouble came exactly 14 days after my mother's funeral. I was staying at the mansion, going through my mother's belongings and trying to figure out how to move forward with my life, when I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a legal claim. Rebecca was suing me for half of the inheritance. I read the document 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. But no, there it was in black and white. Rebecca claimed that my mother had verbally promised her a portion of the estate. She claimed my mother had viewed her as a second daughter and had expressed intentions to include her in the will, but had died before making the changes official. It was complete fiction, total fabrication. My mother barely knew Rebecca. They had maybe 10 conversations in total over the years, mostly polite small talk at family gatherings. But that wasn't even the worst part. Attached to the lawsuit were documents. Bank statements, property deeds, transfer papers, documents that appeared to show my mother had been preparing to divide her assets between Rebecca and me. Documents with my mother's signature. I immediately called my mother's lawyer, David Chen, a man who had worked with her for over 20 years. "David, this is insane," I said, my voice shaking with anger and confusion. "These documents, my mother never signed these. She would never—" David interrupted, his tone serious. "Lucas, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't touch anything, don't sign anything, don't talk to Rebecca, Margaret, or your father about this. We need to examine these documents immediately, because if they're claiming your mother signed them, we need to determine if they're forgeries." Forgeries. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. David hired a forensic document examiner. It took 3 weeks and cost me $15,000, but the results were conclusive. The signatures on every single document were forged. They were good forgeries, clearly done by someone with skill, but they weren't my mother's handwriting. The pressure points were wrong. The pen strokes didn't match. Under microscopic analysis, you could see where someone had traced over printed copies of my mother's real signature. I felt sick. Rebecca had forged my dead mother's signature to steal from me. But I still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. That revelation came when I started investigating further and discovered that the betrayal went much deeper than a lawsuit. Rebecca had been busy in the 2 weeks after my mother's death. She had used the forged documents to attempt to transfer ownership of 3 properties, including the family mansion, into her name. She had gone to my mother's bank with forged power of attorney documents, trying to access accounts. She had contacted my mother's business partners, claiming she was now a 50% owner of the real estate company. She had executed a full-scale assault on my inheritance, and she had done it while I was paralyzed with grief, going through the motions at my mother's funeral. The planning that went into this scheme was staggering. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. Rebecca had been preparing for this. The quality of the forgeries suggested she had hired a professional. The speed of her actions meant she had been waiting for my mother to die so she could steal from me. That thought haunted me. Had Rebecca been watching my mother, waiting for her to pass away so she could steal from me? Had she seen my grief as an opportunity? When I confronted my father about what Rebecca was doing, I expected him to be shocked and supportive. Instead, he was defensive. "Lucas, maybe your mother did promise Rebecca something," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You don't know everything that was discussed. Rebecca says your mother told her she would be taken care of." "Dad, she forged Mom's signature," I said, unable to believe what I was hearing. "We have proof.
The documents are fake." He shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret says the forensic analyst you hired might be wrong. She says we should get a second opinion." Margaret says. That's when it clicked. Margaret was behind this. I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic, but I needed to know what I was really dealing with. What he uncovered was damning. Margaret had a history. This wasn't her first time manipulating family wealth situations. In her first marriage, Rebecca's father, she had tried to claim assets that weren't legally hers during the divorce. The case had been settled out of court, but the pattern was there. She'd also been in significant debt when she married my father, debt that mysteriously disappeared after the wedding. The investigator found something else, too. In the months before my mother's death, Rebecca had taken a 6-week online course about estate law and document authentication. She had downloaded software used for graphic design and document editing. She had researched how inheritance disputes were typically resolved in our state. She had been planning this for months, maybe longer. The investigator also uncovered communications between Margaret and Rebecca, texts and emails they had carelessly failed to delete. In them, they discussed my mother's wealth, speculated about what would happen when she died, and made plans for how they would secure Rebecca's future. One text from Margaret to Rebecca, sent just 3 days after my mother's funeral, read, "Stay calm, stick to the story. He's too emotional right now to think clearly. We'll have this wrapped up in a month." Reading those words, I felt something inside me break. These weren't strangers. This was my family. My father's wife and her daughter, people I had lived with, eaten meals with, celebrated holidays with. And they had conspired to rob me while my mother's body was still warm in the ground. But I still held out hope that my father was just being manipulated, that he was caught in the middle and didn't fully understand what Margaret and Rebecca were doing. I was wrong about that too.
The case went to court 6 months after my mother's death. 6 months of my life consumed by depositions, document reviews, and legal strategies. 6 months of barely sleeping, losing weight, and feeling like I was fighting a war. David Chen assembled a strong legal team. We had the forensic evidence proving the documents were forged. We had the investigators' findings showing Rebecca's preparation and Margaret's history. We had testimony from my mother's business partners confirming she never mentioned Rebecca in any estate planning discussions. Rebecca's legal team fought dirty. They tried to paint my mother as a secretive person who made verbal promises she didn't document. They claimed I had manipulated my mother against my father's new family. They even tried to suggest that I had something to do with my mother's heart attack, implying stress I caused had led to her death. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to them tear apart my mother's character and accuse me of horrible things was torture. There were days I wanted to stand up and scream, days I wanted to walk out and never come back. But I had made a promise to my mother. I would protect what she built. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was tense every single day. My father sat on Rebecca's side of the room, avoiding eye contact with me. Margaret wore expensive clothes and tried to look sympathetic for the jury. Rebecca played the role of the wounded stepdaughter, claiming she just wanted what my mother had promised her. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They walked the jury through every forged document. They showed the timeline of Rebecca's actions. They presented the text messages. They brought in 3 separate forensic handwriting experts, all of whom confirmed the forgeries. Then came the moment that changed everything. Rebecca took the stand. Under oath, she maintained her story. She claimed my mother verbally promised her half of $1 million estate. She said the documents accurately reflected my mother's wishes, and she had no knowledge of any forgeries. Then David began his cross-examination. "Ms. Rebecca," he said calmly, "you claim my client's mother verbally promised you half of $1 million estate, correct?" "Yes," Rebecca said confidently. "And when did this conversation allegedly take place?"
about 6 months before she died, at a family dinner. Interesting, David said, because we have testimony from your mother, Margaret, stating she was present at every family dinner in that time frame. Yet in her deposition, she couldn't recall any such conversation. Why would your mother not remember something so significant? Rebecca hesitated. She might not have been paying attention. David pulled out a calendar. This family dinner, can you tell me the specific date? Rebecca named a date in April. David nodded slowly. Then he presented evidence that completely destroyed her story. On that exact date, my mother was in New York City at a real estate conference. She had hotel receipts, flight records, and signed documents from meetings. There was no family dinner. There was no conversation. Rebecca had lied under oath. The courtroom went silent. I watched Rebecca's face go pale. Margaret looked panicked. My father stared at the floor. But David wasn't done. Ms. Rebecca, he continued, you took an online course about estate law 3 months before Lucas's mother died, didn't you? I was just interested in... You purchased document editing software 2 months before her death, correct? That was for school projects. You researched how to challenge a will and how to prove verbal inheritance promises in your internet search history 6 weeks before her death. Why would you need that information if you genuinely believed you were included in the will? Rebecca couldn't answer. She stumbled through excuses that made no sense. The jury watched her fall apart on the stand. Then David played his final card. He presented bank records showing that Margaret had paid $5,000 to a graphic designer 3 weeks after my mother's death, a designer who specialized in document reproduction and historical document restoration. The timeline matched perfectly with when the forged documents first appeared. The prosecution argued that Rebecca and Margaret had conspired to defraud me of my inheritance through forgery and perjury. They presented evidence of every lie, every forged signature, every manipulated document. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Not only did they rule in my favor on the civil case, confirming I was the sole heir to my mother's estate, but they also recommended criminal charges for forgery and fraud. I won. I got everything back. The mansion, the properties, the money, all of it was legally confirmed as mine. But the story didn't end there. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Rebecca. She was arrested 2 days after the verdict. The charges included multiple counts of forgery, fraud, attempted theft, and perjury. Each count carried serious prison time. Rebecca's trial moved quickly. With all the evidence already compiled from the civil case, the prosecution had an airtight case. Her own testimony during the civil trial where she had lied under oath was played back for the criminal jury. She was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 2. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. No remorse. No acknowledgement of what she had done, just anger that she had been caught. Margaret wasn't charged criminally. They couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that she had directly participated in creating the forgeries, only that she had paid someone who could have made them. But her reputation was destroyed. The evidence presented in court made it clear she had orchestrated the scheme. My father? He divorced her 3 months after Rebecca's conviction. Turned out when the money and schemes disappeared, so did his loyalty to his second wife. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could finally move on with my life, honor my mother's memory, and rebuild. But 6 months ago, I received a letter that reopened all the old wounds.
The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the days I usually handled property management issues for my mother's real estate portfolio. I had been working hard to learn the business, to become the steward of her legacy she always believed I could be. The envelope had a prison stamp. My stomach dropped when I saw it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Rebecca. "Dear Lucas," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm writing to you because I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I need you to know how sorry I am." The letter went on for 3 pages. Rebecca claimed she had been manipulated by her mother. She said she was young and stupid and didn't understand the full scope of what she was doing. She said prison had changed her, that she had found faith, that she had spent countless hours reflecting on her actions. She wrote, "What I did to you during the worst time of your life was unforgivable. I stole from you. I disrespected your mother's memory. I lied in court. I destroyed our family. I understand if you hate me. I hate myself for what I did. But I'm begging you for a chance to make things right. I don't want money or anything from you. I just want your forgiveness. I just want to know that one day, maybe years from now, you won't think of me as the person who tried to steal your inheritance. I want you to remember that once, before all of this, we were family." I read that letter sitting at my mother's old desk in the mansion, the desk where she used to work late into the night, building her empire, the desk where she had written her will, making sure I would be taken care of. And I felt nothing. No sympathy, no forgiveness, just exhaustion. Because here's what Rebecca didn't understand, or chose not to understand. This wasn't about money. This was never about money. It was about what that money represented. Every dollar my mother earned was a result of sacrifice. Every property she bought was a testament to her hard work. The inheritance wasn't just wealth. It was her legacy. It was her love for me, made tangible. And Rebecca had tried to steal that. Not because she needed it, not because my mother had promised it, but because she wanted it, because she felt entitled to something that was never hers. The forgeries, the lies, the courthouse performance, those weren't mistakes. Those were calculated choices. She had researched how to do it. She had planned it. She had executed it while I was broken with grief. I didn't respond to the first letter, but Rebecca kept writing. Once a month, like clockwork, another letter would arrive, each one more desperate than the last. In one letter, she told me about her parole hearing coming up. She explained that having family support would help her case. She said that if I would just write one letter to the parole board explaining that I had forgiven her, it could make the difference between serving 4 years and getting out after 2. In another letter, she told me about how hard prison was, how the other inmates treated her, how she feared for her safety, how every day was a nightmare. She said she thought about ending her life sometimes, and only the hope that I might one day forgive her kept her going. That letter made me angry. She was trying to manipulate me even from prison, trying to use guilt and sympathy to get what she wanted, early release. The same entitled mindset that had led her to forge my mother's signature was now leading her to emotionally blackmail me. I called David Chen. "Can I get a restraining order to stop these letters?" I asked. "You could," David said. "But Lucas, I'd like to suggest something else. Don't respond. Don't engage. Let her send her letters if she wants, but don't let them affect you. She's serving her sentence. Justice was served. You don't owe her anything, not forgiveness, not sympathy, not a single word." He was right. I kept the letters in a drawer, unread after the first few. Let her write. Let her ask. Let her beg. My silence was the only answer she deserved. But then Margaret got involved. 3 months ago, I was at a coffee shop near downtown when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around to find Margaret standing there, looking older and tired. "Lucas," she said, "please, just give me 5 minutes." Every instinct told me to walk away,
But there were people around, and I didn't want to make a scene. I sat back down, and she took the seat across from me. "I know you don't want to see me," she started. "I know what happened in court. I know what you think of me. But Rebecca is my daughter. She made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but she's paying for them. She's lost years of her life. She's suffering every day. I'm begging you as a mother to show her some mercy." I stared at her. Mercy? Like the mercy she showed me when she forged my dead mother's signature? Like the mercy she showed when she tried to steal my family home? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She was confused. She was influenced. "By you," I interrupted. "The investigator found your texts. We know you planned this together. The only reason you're not in prison too is because they couldn't prove you personally created the forgeries. But we both know you were involved." "I just wanted a better life for my daughter," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "Your mother had so much, more than she could ever spend. I thought—" "You thought you were entitled to steal it." Margaret went silent. Then she tried a different approach. "Your father misses you. He asks about you all the time. This has torn him apart. Rebecca going to prison, our divorce, losing his relationship with you, it's destroyed him. If you would just consider forgiving Rebecca, maybe we could all—" I stood up. "My father made his choice when he sided with you and Rebecca instead of believing me. He stood by while his mother and stepdaughter tried to steal my mother's legacy. He chose you over me, Margaret. There's no coming back from that." "Lucas, please." "Tell Rebecca I said no. No forgiveness, no letter to the parole board, no reconciliation. She earned every day of that 4-year sentence. And tell my father that he's welcome to reach out to me when he's ready to apologize for betraying me during the hardest time of my life." I left Margaret sitting there. My hands were shaking as I walked to my car, but I felt something else too. Relief, clarity, power. For months, I had been receiving these letters and feeling like maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was being unforgiving. Maybe I should be the bigger person. But seeing Margaret try to manipulate me in person made me realize something. These people hadn't changed. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They were sorry they faced consequences. Rebecca didn't want forgiveness. She wanted early release from prison. Margaret didn't want reconciliation. She wanted her daughter out of jail. My father didn't miss me. He missed the idea of a happy family where he didn't have to face what he had allowed to happen. But I still wasn't satisfied. Margaret had orchestrated the entire scheme and had walked away with no consequences beyond a divorce. That didn't seem like justice to me. So I decided to teach her a lesson she would never forget.
After my confrontation with Margaret at the coffee shop, I couldn't stop thinking about the unfairness of it all. Rebecca was in prison, yes, but she was just the tool. Margaret had been the mastermind, and she had gotten away with it. I spent weeks thinking about what justice would actually look like. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. My mother raised me to be fair, to be principled. But I also remembered another thing she taught me. Actions have consequences, and sometimes you have to make sure those consequences are felt. I started by looking into Margaret's life after the divorce from my father. What I found was fascinating. Margaret had been living off the alimony from my father. Not a huge amount, but enough to maintain her lifestyle. She had a condo, a decent car, and she spent most of her time trying to rehabilitate her image in social circles after the court case had exposed her involvement in Rebecca's scheme. But there were cracks in her facade. She had always been dependent on other people's money. First her ex-husband, then my father, then her failed attempt to get my inheritance through Rebecca. She had never built anything herself. She had no real skills, no career, no independence. I decided the best way to teach Margaret a lesson
wasn't through revenge or cruelty. It was through consequences, natural consequences that would force her to face reality. I started by having my lawyer send a demand letter. During the investigation, we had uncovered that Margaret had used money from joint accounts with my father, accounts that included money my father had received from my mother in their divorce settlement to fund Rebecca's legal defense in the civil case. Essentially, she had used money that originated from my mother to fight against me. The legal demand was for Margaret to repay those funds, $37,000. It was completely legal and justified. That money should have been kept separate from the criminal scheme. Margaret couldn't pay. She didn't have that kind of money. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a payment plan, but I refused. I wanted the full amount. This put Margaret in a terrible position. She had to make a choice, either find a way to pay the money or face another legal proceeding where her financial situation and her role in Rebecca's scheme would be exposed all over again in court documents that would become public record. She tried to get the money from her first ex-husband, Rebecca's father. He refused. She tried to borrow from friends, but the scandal had made people wary of associating with her. She even tried to sell some jewelry, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, she had to do something she had never done in her entire life. She had to get a job. Margaret, who was 54 years old and had spent her entire adult life depending on men for financial support, had to enter the workforce. She ended up taking a position as an administrative assistant at a small company, making barely enough to cover her basic expenses, let alone save up $37,000. But I wasn't done. I also used my mother's connections in the real estate and business world to make sure Margaret's reputation followed her. I didn't spread lies or exaggerate. I simply made sure the truth was known. When Margaret applied to join certain social clubs or tried to network in business circles, the people she was dealing with knew about her involvement in the inheritance fraud case. Was it harsh? Maybe, but it was honest. Margaret had participated in a scheme to defraud me of my inheritance, and people had a right to know who they were dealing with. The most powerful lesson came from an unexpected place. Margaret tried to get support from my father, her ex-husband, to help pay the legal demand. She went to him crying, explaining how unfair I was being, how vindictive I was acting. My father refused her. He told her he had already lost his son because he had sided with her in the first place. He wasn't going to give her money that would further damage any possibility of rebuilding his relationship with me. That's when Margaret realized the full scope of what she had lost. She had manipulated my father, used him as cover for her scheme, and now that it had all fallen apart, she was completely alone. No husband, no money, no daughter, Rebecca was still in prison, and no social standing. She had to live in a small apartment, work a job she was overqualified for in terms of age, but underqualified for in terms of skills, and face the daily reality that she had gambled everything on stealing my inheritance and had lost spectacularly. A few weeks after Margaret started her job, I received a letter from her. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten letter, much like the ones Rebecca had been sending from prison. In it, Margaret acknowledged what she had done. She admitted that she had been the driving force behind Rebecca's actions. She explained that she had been desperate. She had debts I didn't know about. She felt insecure about her future, and when she saw how much my mother had left me, she convinced herself that I wouldn't miss a portion of it. She wrote, "I told myself I was helping Rebecca secure her future, but the truth is I was trying to secure my own. I used my daughter's youth and loyalty to me to execute a plan that I knew was wrong. When it failed, Rebecca went to prison and I walked free. I've been living with that guilt every day. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you. I stole more than money. I stole your peace of mind during a time when you were grieving your mother. I can never give that back to you. I'm sorry, Lucas. For whatever it's worth, I'm truly sorry." I read that letter 3 times. Unlike Rebecca's letters, which had felt manipulative and self-serving, Margaret's felt genuine. There was no ask at the end, no request for mercy or help, just an acknowledgement and an apology. Did I forgive her? No. But I did something I didn't expect. I had my lawyer send her a response stating that if she maintained regular payments on the money she owed, even small payments, I wouldn't push for accelerated legal action. It wasn't mercy. It was practical. She was never going to come up with $37,000 at once, and dragging her through court again would cost me money and time for no real gain. Margaret took the deal. She's been making payments of $300 a month for the past 8 months. At that rate, it'll take her years to pay off the debt. Years of her life spent paying back money she hoped steal from me. That felt like justice, not revenge. Justice. But there was still one more relationship that needed to be addressed. My father.
I hadn't spoken to my father in over 2 years when he showed up at the mansion. I was in the garden, the same garden my mother had designed and planted, full of roses and lavender and carefully trimmed hedges, when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, there he was. My father looked older, grayer, tired. He stood on the porch like a stranger, his hands in his pockets, unable to meet my eyes. "Lucas," he said, "can we talk?" Every fiber of my being wanted to slam the door. This was the man who had sided with Margaret and Rebecca, who had questioned the forensic evidence, who had sat on their side of the courtroom while I fought for my mother's legacy, who had prioritized his new wife's lies over his own son's truth. But I also saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse. I let him in. We sat in the living room, my mother's living room, filled with her furniture and her artwork and her memory. My father looked around like he was visiting a museum of his past life. "I don't know where to start," he began. "I've been thinking about what to say to you for months. Years, actually. Every conversation I've planned in my head sounds inadequate." "Then just tell me the truth," I said. "Why did you side with him? Why didn't you believe me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "Because I was weak. Because Margaret made me feel needed and important, and I was afraid of losing that. Because I was jealous of your relationship with your mother, and some part of me wanted to believe she had made a promise to Rebecca that would validate Margaret's place in the family. Because I was a coward who chose comfort over integrity. I had expected excuses, justifications, blame shifting, but this was just honesty. Raw, painful honesty. "Your mother was right about me," he continued. "During our marriage, she used to say I was conflict avoidant, that I would rather go along with something wrong than make waves by doing what was right. I thought she was being harsh, but she was right. I watched Margaret and Rebecca plan that lawsuit. I heard them talking. I saw the documents they were preparing, and I told myself it was none of my business, that it was between you and them, that I should stay neutral." "There was no neutral," I said, anger rising in my voice. "Your wife and stepdaughter were trying to steal my inheritance through forgery and fraud, and you stayed silent. You let them do it. You sat in that courtroom and supported them while they lied about my mother." "I know," he said. And his voice cracked. "I know what I did. I know what I lost. I lost my son. I lost the respect of everyone who knew the truth about what happened. I lost my second marriage. But most of all, Lucas, I lost the chance to be the father your mother believed I could be. She called me the day before she died. Did you know that?" I didn't. My heart started pounding. "She called me and told me she had updated her will.
She said she was leaving everything to you because she knew you would honor her legacy. She said she wasn't worried about you because you had strength and integrity, traits you got from her, not from me. And then she said something that's haunted me ever since. She said, "I hope you'll be there for him when I'm gone. I hope you'll be the father he deserves, not the father you were to him during our marriage." And I promised her I would be. I promised your mother on the last day of her life that I would support you and be there for you. Tears were streaming down his face now. And then she died, and Margaret started her scheme, and I broke that promise. I broke the last promise I ever made to your mother. I failed her, and I failed you, and I've been living with that for 3 years. I sat there processing everything he had said. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. Part of me wanted to forgive him right there. But another part, the part that remembered sitting alone in that courtroom, fighting for my mother's legacy, while my own father supported my enemies, that part couldn't let go so easily. Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't that you sided with them. It wasn't even that you doubted me. The worst part was that you made me feel alone during the hardest time of my life. I had just lost my mother, the most important person in my world, and then I had to fight off thieves and liars who were using her death as an opportunity. And my father, the one person who should have been in my corner, abandoned me. I know. I know, and I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't undo what I did. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did to you. Margaret is gone, Rebecca is in prison, and I'm here having to face what I allowed to happen. Having to face the fact that I chose a woman I'd known for a few years over the son I'd raised for 29 years. Why now? Why are you here now? Rebecca's been in prison for 1.5 years. You divorced Margaret months ago. Why show up today? He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was of my mother, young and smiling, from years before I was born. This popped up in my memories today. 28 years ago today, this photo was taken. It was the day your mother told me she was pregnant with you. I remember thinking that my life was complete, that I had everything I needed. And today, looking at this photo, I realized I've spent the years since our divorce running away from the man I was when this photo was taken. Running away from responsibility and integrity because it was easier to just go along with whatever made my life comfortable. He put the phone away. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm here to tell you that I owe you an apology, a real one. And I'm here to tell you that if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if ever, maybe years from now, maybe decades, if you ever want to have a relationship with your father again, I'll be here. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back even a fraction of your trust. I didn't know what to say. I had imagined this conversation 100 times, and in most of those imaginations, I had been angry. I had yelled. I had told him off and sent him away. But sitting there, seeing him broken and honest and truly remorseful, I felt something different. I felt tired. Tired of carrying anger. Tired of the weight of grudges. Tired of letting what they did to me define my life. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said finally. And I don't know if I ever will be. What you did, choosing them over me, doubting me, sitting silent while they tried to destroy me, that broke something between us that might not be fixable. He nodded, accepting this. But I continued. I'm also tired of being angry. I'm tired of letting this consume me. So here's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to have coffee with you once a month. Just coffee. We talk, we see if there's anything left to rebuild. I'm not promising reconciliation. I'm not promising I'll ever call you Dad again with the same meaning it used to have. But I'm willing to see if there's a path forward. His eyes widened with hope. Lucas, Thank you. That's more than I deserve. You're right. It is more than you deserve. But my mother taught me something. She taught me that holding on to anger hurts you more than it hurts the person you're angry at. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. Because I want to be free of all this weight. We talked for another hour. He told me about his life since the divorce, how he had started therapy, how he had been volunteering at a community center trying to do something meaningful with his time, how he had been going through old photos and letters, remembering who he used to be before he let fear and weakness guide his choices. When he left, we didn't hug. We didn't make plans beyond that once-a-month coffee, but there was something in the air that hadn't been there before. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. Someday. Far in the future.
That was 6 months ago. My father and I have had coffee 5 times since then. The conversations are still awkward sometimes. There are topics we avoid. But slowly, very slowly, I'm starting to see glimpses of the man he used to be before Margaret. Or maybe the man he's trying to become now. As for Rebecca, she's still in prison. She has about 6 months left before she's eligible for parole. I haven't responded to any of her letters, and I don't plan to. My father asked me once if I would consider writing a letter to the parole board. I told him no. Rebecca made her choices, and she needs to serve the consequences of those choices. Margaret is still making her monthly payments, still working her administrative job, still living her reduced life. I see her sometimes around town. We live in the same city, after all. She doesn't approach me anymore. She just nods politely if our eyes meet, and we both go about our days. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty about what happened to them, if I feel like I ruined Rebecca's life, or if I was too harsh on Margaret. And my answer is always the same. I didn't ruin Rebecca's life. She ruined her own life when she chose to forge documents and commit fraud. I didn't make Margaret lose her comfortable lifestyle. She lost it when she orchestrated a criminal scheme that failed. I protected what my mother built. I honored her legacy. I fought back against people who tried to take advantage of my grief. There's no guilt in that. But I'd be lying if I said this whole experience hasn't changed me. I'm more cautious now about who I trust. I'm more protective of my boundaries. I've learned that family isn't always defined by blood or marriage, but by loyalty and integrity. I've also thrown myself into managing my mother's real estate business. I've expanded it, modernized it, and made it more profitable than it ever was. Every success feels like a tribute to her. Every property I improve, every deal I close, every decision I make, it's all in her honor. I've started a scholarship fund in my mother's name for first-generation college students studying business, because my mother believed in building something from nothing, and I want to help others who have that same dream. I've renovated parts of the mansion, while keeping the elements she loved most. Her rose garden is now better than ever. Her office is preserved exactly as she left it. But I've also added my own touches, making it a home for my future, not just a museum of the past. And I've started dating again. For years after her death and the court battle, I couldn't imagine opening my heart to anyone. But slowly I'm learning to trust again, learning to believe that not everyone is like Rebecca and Margaret, that there are good people in the world who won't betray you. The woman I've been seeing for the past 3 months is named Sarah. She's a teacher, down to earth, with no interest in my money or my properties. She knew nothing about my family drama when we met,
which was refreshing. When I eventually told her the whole story, she said something I'll never forget. "You survived people trying to take everything from you. That means you're strong enough to build something beautiful with what's left." She was right. So that's my story. The story of how I inherited $1 million and a mansion, how my stepsister and stepmother tried to steal it all, and how I fought back and won. Rebecca is in prison. Margaret is paying back what she owes. My father and I are cautiously rebuilding. And me? I'm living the life my mother wanted for me. I'm honoring her legacy. I'm building my own future. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. When people show you who they really are, believe them. Rebecca showed me she was someone who would forge signatures and lie under oath for money. Margaret showed me she was someone who would manipulate her own daughter to steal from others. My father showed me he was someone who would choose comfort over courage. And I showed them all that I was someone who wouldn't back down, someone who would fight for what was right, someone who would honor promises made to the people I love, no matter what it cost me. Your inheritance isn't always money or property. Sometimes it's values. Sometimes it's the strength to stand up for yourself. Sometimes it's the wisdom to know when to fight and when to let go. My mother left me all three. Rebecca wanted my money. Margaret wanted my property. But neither of them could take what mattered most: the lessons my mother taught me about integrity, resilience, and self-worth. Those are the real inheritance, and nobody can ever steal that from you. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have experienced family betrayal or fought for what's rightfully yours, drop a comment below. Let's support each other. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Remember, protect your legacy, honor those who loved you, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself. This is Lucas, signing off.